Egyptians left husks and grains within the massive walls of the pyramid to sustain the afterlife of a departed pharaoh, for even then bread was the staff of life. The Egyptians were among the first to make raised bread using wheat because it rose most successfully. In the hot air, yeast spores fermented the dough, raising the bread almost miraculously from its flat form. To bake the leavened bread evenly, Egyptians devised cylindrical ovens. Wages were paid in bread. Offerings to the great pharaohs were made with bread, more than 40 varieties, adding honey, fruit, almonds, and cinnamon. From the inexhaustible Nile Valley came a full third of the grain used by Rome and all Italy. It was the Romans who first built mechanical mills, set in motion by slaves, later driven by water. Roman millers were also bakers, and baking was a profession. Newly established bakers' guilds determined who would enter the trade. With state control of all bakeries, bread became political power. As Rome's legions spread, the technique of leavening bread was carried along the road of Roman conquest. Everything to do with bread in the Middle Ages was made mystical and magical by the embodiment of Christ in bread. For Jesus had said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Monks carefully prepared the sacred bread, removing the bran to give the loaf a white, finer texture. Priests often sold extra hallowed loaves to rich noblemen. These landowners could afford time and wasted grain to have white bread made for them, while the peasants subsisted on coarse bran bread. Henry II of England made law the distribution of bread by class, when he decreed that only priests and noblemen eat fresh white bread. For several hundred years, the peasant was deprived of the ability to make healthy bread. Grains he grew contributed to the ever greater splendor of the nobility, while the peasants starved eating bread made with ferns, straw, and bark from trees. But the Protestant Revolution demanded freedom, religious freedom, with the belief that what is human is also holy. Human dignity was extended to the common man who worked the soil. America, being settled to the west, promised individual freedom, vast lands where a man could cultivate the earth and feed himself. The family bread was the first concern of American settlers, but not until the mid-1800s would the European plea for bread be heard. In 1834, Cyrus McCormick invented the reaper, and in 1836, John Deere made a steel plow. Within 30 years, the Midwest was producing millions of bushels of wheat for Europe. A torrent of wheat was pouring out of America, grain for bread. Of course, wheat is just one of many grains that can go into your bread. People in all parts of the world cultivate and eat different cereal grains. Cereal plants are annuals that depend for their survival on large seeds. The cereal grain contains not only the embryo of a new plant, but also a rich store of food to sustain the plant's early life. Each grain is packed with nutrients, protein, oils, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals that can nourish man. In the Western Hemisphere, corn, or maize, has been cultivated for 7,000 years. By the time of the Spanish conquest, the Peruvians were selectively breeding the varieties with the most food value. In Mexico, a flatbread made of corn, a tortilla, is prepared and eaten today as it has been for centuries. Rice is one of the oldest cultivated grains. It was probably being grown in China and India late in Neolithic times. It remains today the most important cereal in Asia. Another ancient grain, millet, fed vast populations in Africa and parts of Asia. Long before the invention of the plow, it is still the favorite grain of the Mongol nomads. In the Middle East, barley is still ground into flour, mixed into dough, and baked into bread, as it has been since earliest Egyptian times. Both rye and oats originated as weeds in the fields. Because of rye's willingness to grow where wheat would not, it quickly spread all across northern Europe and Russia, while oats became the mainstay of Scottish and Irish diets. The choice of which grain is best for making bread became a question of cultural allegiance. In his famous English dictionary, Samuel Johnson defined oats as food for men in Scotland, horses in England. To which a Scotsman replied, "England is noted for the excellence of her horses, Scotland for the excellence of her men." Whole grain breads are made in every imaginable shape and size, and for centuries of holidays and festivals, elaborate traditional breads have been baked. Delicate yeast cultures, used at home to leaven bread, could not survive the journey west with American pioneers. Instead, they relied on the 4,000-year-old method of making sourdough bread with a little leftover fermented dough. With their pot of sourdough starter aboard ship, strapped to the back, or stashed in a covered wagon, Columbus, gold-seeking 49ers, and the settlers that followed were ready to make bread anywhere they stopped. Replenished every time bread was made, the treasured sourdough starter lasted until homesteads were established. Until this day, some old-timers claim. Bread is so important that the lack of this most basic food has warned of starvation in times of war, crop failure, and famine. Bread lines formed in every country involved in the First World War. As the lines formed during the Second World War, Herbert Hoover observed, "World peace means a piece of bread."